you decide in advance what bullshit smells like, you know, and then anything that you encounter that smells that way, you don't step in it. I mean, or anything, you don't eat it. I mean, it looks like a chocolate cake. It looks like some kind of delicious, you know, weird Peter Pan type dish. You know, those like weird multicolored dishes that somehow look delicious. Looks great, but it smells like shit. And you're like, not gonna do it. I've been here before. I ate this, you know. I followed this impulse to consume this thing because it looks so good, and turned out it was a bunch of shit. And in the same way, when these patterns manifest themselves in our lives, it looks real. You know, when the pattern causes you to feel inadequate, it doesn't feel like feeling inadequate. It feels like being inadequate, right? Like unworthy, unlovable, whatever, you know, like it's the same old stuff. It's like, it's less, it's worse than like modern pop music, people's dysfunctions, I feel like, you know. But because every now and then there's one of those that's catchy. I've never found a dysfunction that I liked that was just kind of like, that's interesting, this is good. But it always feels real. But what people do is that when they're not in the state, they have a certain degree of clarity, right, about how bullshit the state is. And they imagine, they make a mistaken kind of assumption. And it's like a David Allen thing. You're not always as smart as you are when you're at your smartest. You're not always as clear as you are when you're at your clearest. And so when I'm not in the midst of feeling utterly unworthy, I look back at it and I say, oh, I see how that's a bunch of bullshit. And there's something inside that assumes that the next time I start feeling that way, that I'm going to recognize it, which isn't true. In fact, it's almost certain that I won't. And so I think because a person doesn't anticipate what it's like to be in the state, they never build out their strategy for responding resourcefully to the state, to the point that they include a step where, as a result of being in the state, they feel as though the state is true and real and actual, and then build a step of resourceful response that goes beyond that. You know, because for most people, when they reach the step at which the bullshit seems real or right or whatever, there is no resourceful step forward from there. There's only unresourceful steps in the direction of go along with the state. But it's very powerful. I mean, I can remember like what it was like in a sort of mentally physical way to build the step. And it was recognition. So I feel that it's real. And then like this, I'm going to take the next step because it feels real. So I'm going to follow it. But then recognizing, wait. It felt real last time and it was bullshit. That's significant because it changes the meaning. People have like unconscious automatic meanings that they assign to certain things. You know, and one of the things is if the feeling that I feel feels real, then it's probably true. Or the reality to which it corresponds is probably true. I feel unworthy, so I probably am. I feel not okay, so probably am, right? And part of it is learning that that's not always a useful meaning to assign to a certain feeling. The fact that the feeling feels real doesn't mean that the feeling maps onto reality. It doesn't mean that following the feeling is going to lead to a desirable outcome. You know, now if you can feel the feeling and assess it at the same time, it's useful because you can say, wait a minute, the last time I felt this feeling, did it feel real? I was like, well, yeah, it felt really real. And I acted on it, right? Yeah. And then what happened? Created bad results. Created results that were not only undesirable, but that were obviously not inevitable, and that were the byproduct of thoughts I had about myself, right? And so what people, I think, this is what I have benefited from, is you arrive at a point where the path goes forward in only one direction, which is believing the feeling that you're feeling. And you build a new step, which is recognizing that the fact that the feeling feels real doesn't mean that it is. I mean, it's a real feeling, but it doesn't mean that it's true. And it doesn't mean that you have to act upon it, but that you have to believe it, right? And then you can begin to move in the direction of, okay, well, let's say that this feeling that feels so real is bullshit. Let's say it's possible for bullshit feelings to feel really real, because after all, if bullshit feelings felt like bullshit feelings, who would waste any time feeling them? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Who would ever say to themselves, well, this is obviously a bunch of racket bullshit, but I think I'll go ahead and spend my life feeling this way anyway. No one does that. It always feels real and very convincing. Look at the dogs. Oh my. Really pretty. Oh, he wants to say hi. He likes it. Come on, we gotta go. They're being nice. They cleared the way for you.
We're in training.
Oh, I can tell. It's working. How nice. Isn't it beautiful? I really like those big old dogs. You see that one? He didn't do the full sit. Like his butt was kind of like hovering off the ground. So, you know, it's recognizing there are these little stupid steps, stupid segments in my decision-making process, in my reasoning process. I mean, everyone has it. It's sort of like coming upon bumpy segments of a road, poorly paved, unpaved segments, right? Potholes and stuff. And I mean, one of the things about it is that the potholes tend to be in places that are relatively remote, you know, because they don't get repaired. And it's like, you know, you're already pretty far along your journey. You're not going to turn around. I mean, it's like, you know, when we go down like the dirt roads and stuff looking for cool stuff. Hey. Okay.
Oh, so pretty.
Pretty browns. When you, you're not going to turn around. You know, there are situations where we encounter unpaved roads in the mountains and stuff, and points in the unpaved road where we would turn around if that was how it started, but we were only so far down. And so in the decision-making process, the shittiest steps in the process are usually pretty far down. You know, because I'm pretty far down. I'm like, well, fuck, I'm not going to turn around now. I've been warming up to devalue myself here. And the other thing is that as you move down the decision process, there's a stepwise degradation in the quality of your state and kind of an accompanying degradation in the quality of your thinking and your feel. You know what I mean? It's this kind of self-perpetuating thing. Like when you're really, really hungry, maybe you will be talked into eating something that you wouldn't normally eat. You know what I'm saying? And then that makes you feel really bad. And then every sort of not great meal you eat makes it easier to eat another not great meal. And so it's realizing that there are places in my decision-making process, right? When I'm deciding what I'm going to think about myself or what feelings I'm going to believe or act on or be defined by or whatever. Or maybe I don't allow myself to be defined by my feelings, but I allow myself to feel them and act on them, and then sort of it accumulates in reality in the form of a non-relationship or a bad relationship or a unfit body or whatever it is that I have and don't want or want and don't have, you know. And then I'll devalue myself on the basis of that. You know, it's like, hang on a second, I got to finish cooking up this reality so that I can be oppressed by it, kind of thing. But recognizing that there are places that, like, there are certain times when you believe certain things consistently, certain moods that you get in where you'll believe certain things about yourself, right? Certain feelings that will generate certain behaviors. And you consistently get into those moods. You consistently feel those feelings. And when you do, you consistently do a particular thing. You know, when you feel the bad feeling, you believe it. And at some point, you have to start doing something new. Like, for example, noticing the fact. Like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it mean to believe the feeling, right? And notice that you're doing it. And begin to become aware of the fact that, like, I'm participating in this. And this participation is so perfunctory. It's so automatic. It's, well, of course, because you've never done anything different. But it's realizing that the fact that you've never done anything different doesn't mean that there's not something different you could do. This is important, you know, because people very often, you know, they sit around and they act like the only thing they can do with their mind is what they're just kind of wired to do, or what someone taught them to do, or whatever. But it's like, that's what what the fuck's the matter with you? You can't do that. Like, that's not, if you live your life that way, it's going to be less than it could be. You know what I'm saying? And at some point, it does involve noticing there are things that, I mean, if someone says something horribly abusive to you and you believe it, that's fucking stupid. Now, of course, that person shouldn't say that thing to you. And at this kind of societal, interpersonal level, the only reason people pay so much attention to society and interpersonal issues is that those are levels at which the average person's bandwidth and awareness will allow them to compute, right? The reason people aren't discussing this interpersonal stuff more is not that it's not important. It's that most people don't have sufficient awareness to even realize that there's a there there. And so when people And what happens very often is that we overlook these deep core layers of responsibility that are intrinsic to existing and intrinsic to having a capacity to experience. We overlook these things. And like if I'm a little kid and my dad says something mean to me and I allow that to shape me, that's a my problem thing at the end of the day, you know? Now, is it understandable? Absolutely. Should you be non-compassionate to someone because they've done that? No, because it's very easy to do, and everyone probably is doing it to some extent or another. But the solution, though, right? The defect is in me, right? It's in me. It is. The problem isn't they said it. The problem is I believed it. The problem isn't that I felt it. The problem is that I believe the feeling. The problem is that I responded. I reacted to the feeling in the same old way. You know, if I say that to you, it might be offensive or hurtful or irritating, or it might seem untrue. But if you get to the point that you say it to yourself, well, you know, and say it to yourself as a means of what? As a means of excusing their behavior so that you can stick around and put up with their bullshit? No. I don't know why anyone would think that I'm suggesting people build a capacity to have new experiences in order to sit around and just put up with other people's mistreatment, as if that's the logical consequence. And I think that really is kind of demonstrative of how stupid a lot of people actually are, and how sort of little awareness they have of what happens when you deliberately engineer more resourceful experiences. You put up with less shit, not more. No, nobody who has a capacity of building a resourceful response to abuse tolerates the abuse more, because sort of by definition, creating a more resourceful experience of abuse involves telling the person to go fuck themselves in some way or another. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then you leave and you realize that it had nothing to do with you, in the sense that there's not something wrong with you that caused it to happen, but it had a lot to do with you in the sense that you selected the partner, you stayed for as long as you did, you know what I'm saying? And you're not saying that there's something wrong with me, but you're saying, God, there's something about the way I think about myself and the world, there's something about the way I relate to what's possible, something about the way I tend to perceive situations, sorting by necessity, assuming that things are my fault, not realizing what's available to me, you know what I'm saying? I'm making it my job to please everyone else. Something about the way that I do being me resulted in me getting into and staying into a relationship that wasn't great. Nobody concludes that and then feels bad about themselves. And if they are, they need to stop. I mean, and that's another thing too. It's not that accurate insight can't be painful. It's that the fact that accurate insight can be painful is not a reason to discourage people from having those insights. It's a reason to teach a person how to have accurate insights without resisting them or making them mean things that are hurtful or unpleasant to them. I mean, a person can generate a bad feeling in response to encountering pretty much any information. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, any truth has the potential to be disconcerting to a person. So does that mean that we should just ignore them all? I mean, I see, like, well, you have to be careful because somebody might. Yeah, somebody might. You know what I'm saying? This is the reason that you have to have, I'm surprised there's not a warning label somewhere on this fence that says that, you know, if you fall out of an airplane and land on this, then it might injure you. You know, it's ridiculous. It's like, yeah, of course, somebody might misinterpret this. That's part of your problem. Persistent patterns of sort of disadvantageous misinterpretation, probably designed to create some kind of experience that is consistent with their life script. Feeling bad about themselves, feeling angry at anyone who might help them. This is some sneaky shit that people do when they're transmitting patterns to their children. You know, they teach them a really cool trick that says, listen, here's how you recognize anybody who might challenge this pattern to the point of growing out of it. And here's all of the different ways that you can make bad feelings inside yourself and convince yourself that those bad feelings are because of what that person is saying and doing in the way that they are, so that you can get angry at them or intimidated by them or offended by them or irritated by them, so that you can get the fuck away from them as fast as you can, so that you can be a miserable son of a bitch just like I am. This is a thing that this kind of comes parcel and package, right? I mean, I know, like, one of the things that I learned was how to feel like you were smarter than everyone else, you know, so that anyone who was saying anything that was inconsistent with your experience was an idiot, and so you stopped listening to them. And so the danger that you would listen to anything that might have the capacity to change your experience, anything that's new, the chances that you would listen to that long enough for it to impact you in a meaningful way is very small. And so you can stay exactly the same, which is great if that's what you want to do, But that's one of those things to me, is that the aspects of myself that are worthy of keeping ought to be able to withstand any potentially change-inducing stimulus. I feel like that's true, and if they aren't, well, that's a problem with me. If I, if I suddenly become a billionaire and become an absolutely terrible person as a result, is the moral of that story that I should have stayed away from money, or is it that I should have maybe built some resiliency into my, decent person qualities? That's, what I'm saying? And so, I think coming back to those patterns again, it's recognizing that you've got little reality producing factories inside your head. And when I say reality, what I'm referring to is the experientially relevant aspects of your reality, right? I don't necessarily think you're manufacturing gravity in your head, but is gravity really an experientially relevant aspect of your experience? You know what I'm saying? From one moment to the next, it's kind of in the background. It's kind of just one of the things that we all agree to for purposes of playing the game. So you've got these factories in your head, and they're manufacturing this experience, these experientially relevant elements of reality, and they feel real because that's what they're supposed to do, and if you believe everything just because it feels real to you, then you're these people that just believe whatever bullshit you tell them. Like they're in a relationship with a guy, or I guess the classic example is a guy. I don't know if this is always the case, but it's definitely not always the case. But I don't know. A guy will just tell a girl the most obvious lies. Oh, I was with so and and he's got some unfamiliar panties wrapped around his neck and lipstick all over his collar, and he smells like the lady's perfume, and she's hiding behind him, naked. And he's like, oh yeah, no, I was just over at my buddy's house, and the girl will believe it. You know what I'm saying? And everyone feels contemptuous of a person like that, or condescendingly compassionate. But we're all that with regard to our own patterns, in a way. We're very susceptible to our own bullshit, And the most relevant elements of this bullshit are entirely intrapersonal. And so dealing with it is not about not bullshitting your partner, right? I think that's important to recognize. Dealing with it is about not bullshitting yourself. Because if you make it about not bullshitting your partner, you're bullshitting yourself, and you're going to continue to bullshit your partner because you haven't learned to not bullshit yourself. That's what that is. So don't make it about them. Because as soon as you do, what you do is, if I make making myself a better person about you, as soon as you piss me off, I'd be like, fuck that. I'm going to go do my old patterns again, But if making myself a more kind of resourceful person, more interested in, receptive to, willing to identify and adopt things that are resourceful, unwilling to do things that I can clearly see aren't resourceful, it shouldn't matter as that commitment deepens and as it becomes stronger. It shouldn't really matter what you're up to. You know what I'm saying? Because as soon as you start behaving in a way that really pisses me off, well, that behavior, the fact of that behavior becomes a part of reality. And what was my commitment to? Responding resourcefully to reality. And so what happens is you get this really great thing where you can dig and dig and dig and never reach the bottom of your commitment to resourceful response. Because as soon as it happens, you've already made a commitment to attempt to respond resourcefully to that. You've already said, and fuck me if I can't. I have work to do if I can't. And that's just my job, that's my business, that's my task. That's what I've decided. I've already acknowledged to myself. I've already recognized that that's the key, that's the secret, that's the special sauce that's going to let me create the life I want, right? And that's a great thing when there's no escape, when there isn't a yes but. It's no longer I've committed to responding resourcefully, but this person's acting like a real asshole. She's being a real bitch, and so it all flies out the window at the critical moment when something different, when behaving differently, when reacting differently could shift something. Maybe not in them, maybe in you. It could shift something, right? At the critical moment, you say, well, I've committed to respond resourcefully to reality, regardless of what reality is like, but I don't like the way reality is right now, so I'm not going to do it. That's like saying, that's like building a clause into a contract that makes the contract. I mean, actually, it's funny. I was watching an episode of Judge Judy recently, and I learned something new about a certain type of something that there's like things you can't put into a contract, and it's something that's I think because it's so ambiguous that it voids that it basically gives one party to the contract so much flexibility that it essentially renders the contract impotent. And she's like, you can't have that, something due to ambiguity or something like that, or because of ambiguousness. And so a lot of people, they make these commitments to themselves, and it's unintentional. It's that they haven't read the contract clearly, which is, again, coming back to those decision processes and flowing through them. That's what reading the fine print is like realize, rather than just promising yourself that you're not going to feel the feeling again or do the thing again or whatever. But, you're making promises that you can't keep, kind of thing, because you don't know how you fall short. You have no compassion for the version of you who makes the unresourceful decision. And I think part of, growing out of this stuff is having, and compassion is not like you sit around and go, I talked to my inner little girl, she stood, all this. I don't know if that helps, but shit. To me, the thing is, the compassion is, don't be uncharitable in your assessment of the version of yourself that is able to make sense out of doing things that serve you. Assume that to that person in that moment, it seems perfectly logical and obvious and appropriate and inevitable to think, feel, and act in the ways that you have thought, felt, and acted in the past that haven't served you. Give that version of you the benefit of the doubt and say, well, if that version of me fucked the current version of me over, somebody must have really conned them. I mean, it must have been under a spell, right? Someone must have, slipped something in their drink. I mean, because I know myself, and I know that I wouldn't just for the hell of it. I mean, in your current state, you would never do these things that don't serve you, right? And yet you did them. And so something must shift, something must be different. And so I think that really building the awareness required to successfully navigate the same old unresourceful states in a more conscious and useful way requires that you assume that if you are consistently fucking up in a particular way, creating some result or outcome you don't want, that the version of you that does that is not just a piece of shit who is just doing it because it doesn't clear to do any better. It gets tricked, it gets duped, it becomes convinced. Something happens that leads someone who is capable of doing better to not do better. And when you understand that, you say, wait a minute, wow, if I'm continually choosing to talk to my partner in this way, or continually choosing to talk to myself in this way about my partner, or allow myself to be talked to by my partner in this way, well, that's so inconsistent with what makes sense to me now. And I really cannot imagine that I would ever allow myself to do that. I know I have many times. Wow, I really want to watch and pay close attention and figure out, when does the bullshit start making sense to me? When do I start feeling the feeling of being persuaded? Yes. When does it start to become what? Because that's interesting, right? Because remember, you're not just an asshole. You're not just a bitch. You're not an idiot. Like, that's not just who you are. But if you have demonstrated the capacity to behave in these ways, right? All that means is that you're capable of entering into states where those behaviors make sense to you. Just long enough for you to do them. And then you snap out of it and feel terrible. Or remorseful. Or say to yourself, well, that just goes to show. I promised myself I wouldn't do it again, and here I am. Well, guess what? I'm going to promise you that Patrick Duffy's going to make us a delicious dinner when we get home. It's stupid. I can't do it. I don't have the connections at this time. How fun would that be? But
who was it last time?
Rob Lowe.
Yeah.
The
choices are hilarious.
There's nothing wrong with Rob Lowe. I just think Patrick Duffy's cool. What if Patrick Duffy and Suzanne's? Is it Summers? You never remember.
Yeah, Step by Step.
Is it plural?
I don't know.
Singular. Anyway. And so that's when and a lot of people, they have a very low regard for themselves, and they think that there's just a trash version of themselves that's irredeemable, a piece of crap, and so they never bother trying to understand how that version is convinced to do things You know, that, I mean, and, you know, think about how uncharitable that would be if you did that with your partner. Oh, you know, my wife was swindled out of a bunch of money. She's just an idiot. She doesn't understand it. Well, did you listen to the con man? I mean, if he called and said your husband's in the hospital and we need this information, you know what I'm saying? Like if you assume basically charitable things about people, and if those people then behave in ways that seem incomprehensible to you, I have found that the natural inclination is to say, wait, I want to, because I'm finding myself feeling like I want to judge you right now. But I also understand that if I had all of the information, this would probably make more sense to me than it does. So rather than acting on the feeling that is occurring as a result of my not having full information, I want to see if I can get more information from you to understand more about what's going on, because I have to believe that I can't imagine a configuration of reality that would have led you to say or do this thing, but you said or did it, and so I have to assume that there was a configuration of reality that contributed to it. So I want to know what that was. I mean, you know, it's just morbid curiosity sometimes. And when you start to assume this about yourself, what happens is you stop just making these like white knuckle commitments. You start watching and you say, gosh, there's that feeling, you know, like I said, I wasn't going to waste time scrolling on social media again today. It was so crystal clear to me last night when I promised myself I wouldn't do it. So obvious what I needed to do, and the feeling of not doing it was so fresh in my mind, and how productive I can be and free from habit and all of this. And yet here I am again feeling that feeling. Isn't that interesting? What am I saying to myself? Well, I'm saying I have plenty of time. Well, no, hang on a second. Actually, I tried to think of something to do. And although there were a bunch of things that I could do, there wasn't one absolutely clearly defined thing that was the thing to do now. And it was a result of that. It wasn't that there wasn't anything for me to do. It was that there was 5 equally worthwhile things to do. So none of them stood out. So I defaulted back to the habit that I knew. That's how I end up looking at social media again. You know what I'm saying? Just stuff like that. And once you know that, you know really what your problem is that there's not a definite sequence, there's not a clearly defined schedule, there's not one thing, I mean, like at 1 o'clock, you know, you don't want to have 7 things you could do. You want there to be one, I mean, you can deviate from it if there's something else you'd rather do. But if you're not doing anything, what do? If you don't have anything else to do, what do? Do you start reading some course notes or a book, or do you go on social media? See, that is the key thing. What do you do when there's nothing else to do? It's important. And so that's a little aside, but that's like understanding how you waste time. You know what I'm saying? And so whatever it is that you're doing, whatever the patterns are, if you assume that it makes sense, you study it very closely and you say a little something to yourself, or you focus on what you don't want, or you imagine some unpleasant scenario, or you attribute some meaning to something that someone did or didn't do, and that kind of gives you a little bit of a bad feeling. And then you forget about what you were excited about, or you forget about the thing that you were trying to accomplish or create today. And then you kind of just, and you see, you know what I'm saying? Well, what a moron. People fall off mountains. God, they have to be just so stupid. I can't imagine. It's like, well, no, you weren't there. You're standing here, and there's a little slope, and you're still far away from the edge. It's totally fine. And as you get a little closer to the edge, you get a good picture. And you get on this little slope. I mean, you could fall down and roll 7 times and not fall off the edge. It's safe. But then, you know, there's some gravel, and actually a little closer to the edge seems safer because the rocks aren't as pointy and sharp, you know, and then next thing you know, you're splat at the bottom. It's like, but when you assume anyone who did that must just be stupid, then you're going to be the next idiot that falls off the hill. You know what I'm saying? But if you assume it makes sense in the context in which it's occurring, you study the context, and then you understand how it occurs. And when you understand how it occurs, you understand how you can respond to the occurrence in a way that sort of breaks the wheel of recurrence.